Good evening! How are you? Let me turn that off. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Great to be with you on a Wednesday night. Lots to cover today. Let's light up the darkness. All right. This is going to be fun. The daf, the page of Talmud that we're covering today is actually quite short, so we'll get through that material pretty quickly. But I've got two compact and special teachings for the Torah portion of our day. Remember, AT Daily is a Torah and Talmud class, something from the Torah of general interest, applicable to everybody, always at the beginning of the show. And then we get into the more advanced material, our daily page of Talmud, part of our 7.5-year Daf Yomi journey through the entire Talmud. Who is with us today as we get it going on a Wednesday night? I wonder if something is wrong. The numbers are much smaller than usual. Tell you something, these Facebook algorithms, you just don't know who it's going to show up, who's going to see it, when they're going to see it, how they're going to see it. But hopefully everyone gets notified who wants to see the show today. Rebecca in LA, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Gwen in Michigan, James in Indianapolis, Lucy in Minnesota, Stephen in New Hampshire. Steve says shalom, Ann in Merced, Yosef in Massachusetts, Donna in Texas, Melissa in Great Neck, PK in Colorado, Paula wishing us stars and roses, Stephen, no notification. I wonder why. It's just, I came on late. It's weird. And today I started exactly on time. I don't know. I don't know what to do about Facebook and its algorithms, but this is why it's a big initiative for us to build out the Accidental Talmudist app, so you won't have to rely on any kind of random notifications from social media. You'll be directly connected to us. That is something in development, and God willing, we will have it soon. Over there on the YouTube side, let me see, are we live? Yes, we are. And Marjorie is in Georgia and Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. Okay, that song, Lo Yamalet, is we just discovered it last night. Fun song from a singer named Baruch Shalom, and it's great. That's a line from the Siddur, and I think it's from Psalms, that a king cannot rely on his army, right? I mean, force only goes a certain way. But you can, no matter how big your army is, you're not going to be able to get around God's will for yourself and your nation. There is no escape, from God's will. And so if you align your will with God's will, you'll be in great shape. If you want to go up against eternal values of the Lord, you're going to eventually have problems, even if in the short time you may succeed. Okay, Torah today, I have two thoughts, one very specific. So from today's Torah reading, right, from this week's Torah portion and today's reading for Wednesday, we encounter exactly what we're in right now. We're counting the 50 days from the second day of Passover. Right now we're, the Sephiros HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, counting off 7 weeks, and then we'll arrive at Shavuos when we celebrate the revelation at Mount Sinai and the giving of Torah. So this command to count these days, count every day, and after the evening prayers, we say a blessing. Bless you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us concerning the counting of the Omer. And then we count that day. So we're right in that process, and that commandment is in today's reading. And it says, from the day after the rest day of Passover, from the day you bring the Omer measure of the wave offering, each of you shall count for yourselves 7 weeks, these weeks being complete. You shall count up to the day after the 7th week, that day completing 50 days, and then offer a new meal offering before the Eternal, right? So you bring of the new grain, but you bring barley on the day after Passover begins, the second day of Passover. You count these 7 weeks, and then you're going to bring what? From the land where you live, you shall bring selected bread, 2 loaves made of 2/10 of an ephah, being of fine quality wheat flour, and baked as leavened bread, as the offering of the first ripening grain before the Eternal. So part of the offerings of Shavuos are these 2 loaves of leavened wheat bread. And so these 7 weeks, we're kind of, as we refine our own personal characteristics, we sort of go from barley, which was considered animal food in the ancient world, to wheat, so the human food, right? It's like we're sort of refining our animal souls until we rise to the level of being deserving to eat wheat rather than barley, leavened bread rather than unleavened. And hopefully we build up our merit during that time. I read this because it's a nice coincidence that as we're talking about that commandment that we're counting the Omer right now, and then eventually we bring the 2 loaves as an offering on Shavuos, in today's daf, our page from the Talmud today, we'll be talking about the high priest and those 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuos. Before we get to that, the Torah thought that I also wanted to share today. This is a really terrific book if you're into Jewish wisdom. It's called Jewish Wisdom by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, a great writer. He's written many, many books, and this is a beautiful, beautiful collection. Like you just sit down, read a few pages of this book, or 1 page or 1 paragraph, and you will be guaranteed to grow in wisdom. That's Jewish Wisdom by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. So what I wanted to share today is this very interesting teaching that bears on something I shared earlier today on the page, which was an article about a religious girl. She wrote it in 2013, but it's pretty recent, in Israel, right? So she grew up in a religious community. She's Haredi, right? Like ultra-Orthodox. Hold on, just having a little Facebook glitch. Let me get that fixed up. Technical difficulties. Okay. And so in Israel, there is an exemption. This is often debated and argued and politically, etc. We're not really talking about whether the ultra-Orthodox should serve in the army or not. The point is that this young girl, young woman who grew up in the ultra-Orthodox environment, where it is true, of course, there are exemptions for the religious, but there's a lot of men who grow up in religious communities and go into the IDF. They serve in the Israeli armed forces. There's whole platoons, brigades. I mean, I don't know what the military term, but there are whole units of religious soldiers. And they sleep a little less than the rest of the army so that they can make time to pray 3 times a day, eat kosher, etc. So, there's not a small number of religious men serving in the Israeli army, but religious women, very rare. Right? Very rare, much more difficult. There's just a lot, that's difficult about serving in the army for a religious woman who's particularly concerned with modesty of dress, in addition to all the dietary needs, etc. But this young woman was determined to serve, and she told her story of her service in the article I shared earlier. That was, and I sort of found that article after I read this passage in the Telushkin. So we have a verse in the Torah, Deuteronomy 16:20, very famous. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Tzedek, tzedek shall you pursue. Now, a kind of very traditional interpretation of why does the Torah repeat the word justice, right? It could just say, justice shall you pursue. You shall pursue justice, right? There will be justice in your land. You will be a just society. But why does it repeat? Justice, justice shall you pursue. A traditional interpretation of that is offered here in the Telushkin book and attributed to a Hasidic Rebbe, Yaakov Yitzhak of, I don't know how to pronounce this, Pozisha, maybe Pozisha, I don't know, who lived from 1766 to 1814. Right? So this Rebbe, Yaakov Yitzhak, a Pozisha, said, why is it repeated? Justice, justice you shall pursue. What it means is that the ends don't justify the means, right? In pursuing justice, you shall employ justice. So just the fact that you're going to have a righteous outcome is not going to justify, that you commit evil or wickedness or trample over somebody's rights, etc. You have to pursue justice in a just manner. It's a very traditional interpretation. Then Rabbi Telushkin brings down a teaching from the Talmud on this subject. The Talmud, this is at Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin 32b, justice, justice you shall pursue. This is offering guidance in a case where there are two competing values. In other words, both people are right, both people have a case, both people are entitled to their rights, but they're on a collision course, right? So both are entitled, both have a good argument, and yet both can't, be served at the same time in the same way. There's just not enough room. And the Talmud gives two examples of this: a narrow river and two boats are coming. Okay, so each is on his side of the river. They're obeying the law. They're sailing properly up the river, sticking to their side of the river. But they're going to meet in a place where the river is so narrow that if they just try to keep going, they're going to collide and both boats are going to sink. So in that case, one of the boats has to pull over, like literally kind of go up on shore and let the other boat pass. Likewise, if you have two camels meeting on a narrow road and it's too narrow for the two camels to pass each other, so one of the camels is going to have to back up, find a place where there's a little bit of a wider area, and let the other camel pass. So in that situation, both have a right of way, but they can't both exercise their right of way. They have to work together. So which camel should give way to the other? Is there a way to decide? Are they going to flip a coin? Well, the Talmud points out that if one of the camels is burdened and the other is not, okay, so the camel that does not have a burden, the one that can presumably move faster, is more agile in that situation, that's the one that should back up. It's easier for the unburdened camel to back up, and it's a kindness that the burdened camel, should not have to have too big an interruption. He's working hard enough carrying his big burden. It's a somewhat obscure Talmudic teaching, but it came up in a very practical moment. This somewhat obscure Talmudic discussion became widely discussed in Israel in 1952. That fall, the country was rent, split apart by a religious secular dispute over the government's right to draft women for national military service, a move the religious parties vigorously opposed. In the midst of the controversy, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion traveled to Bnei Barak to meet the Hazon Ish. This was Rabbi Avraham Yeshayahu Karelitz, 1878 to 1953, the leader of Israel's ultra-Orthodox Jews at that time. Ben-Gurion asked the religious sage how religious and secular Jews could live together in harmony. And the Hazon Ish responded based on this Talmudic passage about the two boats passing each other in a narrow part of the river, or two camels passing each other on a narrow mountain road. Said the Hazon Ish, the Talmud states, two ships are traveling down a river. One is laden, the other is empty, and they meet. If they attempt to pass one another, both will sink. The empty ship must back up and allow the burdened ship to pass. The ship of the religious Jews, which is laden with thousands of years of sanctification of the divine name and devotion to Torah, has encountered in the narrow straits of our era, right, 1952, the empty ship of the secularists. There can be no compromise, said the Hazon Ish. There can be no harmony. The collision between the ships is inevitable. Therefore, whose ship ought to back up before whose? Should it not be your empty ship before our laden one? This was cited by Lawrence Kaplan in his article, The Hazon Ish, a Haredi critic of traditional orthodoxy. Needless to say, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion heatedly denied the Hazon Ish's characterization of non-Orthodox Israeli society as empty. But, anxious to avert a civil war, he exempted religious women from military service. So, I'm not here to comment, on this idea. Certainly, I would not characterize secular society as empty. But I think that this image is very interesting. That when we connect, right, with the tradition, when we're Torah Jews connected to the tradition, right, it's not just the Torah that we're connected to, it's not just the Talmud that we're connected to. We're connected to thousands of years of our ancestors sanctifying the divine name by obligating themselves or by respecting the obligations that God placed upon us. And that is a ship, that is heavily laden and has a tremendous amount of inertia, right? That ship is only going to be redirected from one side to another with great, with great care and great difficulty and slowly, right? Because this ship has been going for so long and with so many generations, right, of respecting these laws. So it's worthy of respect. And when we have these interactions and conflicts between the religious and the secular, first of all, the religious should respect the secular and understand that people are often coming from a genuine and truth-seeking place. But we also hope that the secular will respect the religious and understand that they're not, just deciding willy-nilly to be zealots, right, according to a system that the seculars can't understand. The religious people are, tapped into and bound by thousands of years of tradition, and a tradition for which our ancestors often paid a heavy price, and martyrs in every generation due to the persecution of the Jews. It's a serious inheritance. Okay, just wanted to share that for our Torah portion today. Now let's get to our daf. Where are we? We are on page Yud Zayin. This is page 17 in Tractate Yoma. These are the laws of Yom Kippur. And we are now in chapter 1 discussing the second Mishna, where we learn that for the 7 days that the high priest is sequestered in the temple complex before Yom Kippur, what does he do? He's doing all of the avoda, all of the divine service of the priest that's normally done by other ordinary priests. Now the high priest is doing it so that he's practicing and getting very, very fluent with everything that he's going to have to do on Yom Kippur. Not only the rituals that only the high priest can do on Yom Kippur, but on that day he will also bring the other offerings, which on any other day the daily offerings on Yom Kippur will be brought by the high priest, even though on other days of the year the daily offerings could be brought by ordinary priests. He will also light the incense. He will clean out the cups of the candelabra, meaning the menorah, etc. He's going to do all the duties of the priests on that day. Okay, so it was taught in the Mishnah that as the high... okay, and so the beginning, it's a very short daf today. On the A side, which we're not even going to cover, it's a continuation of the discussion of yesterday, of the location of the various chambers that surround the Hall of the Hearth, which is just to the north of the temple itself. When it was standing 2,000 years ago. So if you're more, again, if you want to continue, if you have a continuing interest in this sort of geography and architecture of the temple, you can get a little bit of this discussion of which room was where in that particular area of the temple, the Hall of the Hearth. Now we pick up the discussion of our Mishnah, where it said, it was taught in the Mishnah that as the high priest sacrifices any portion that he chooses first and takes any portion that he chooses first. Now here we're discussing on an ordinary day, right? On an ordinary day of the year, so we know that we have the priestly watches, right? So every week there's a new group of priests that comes in. There's this group called a watch, a priestly watch. It's a family or a group of families, and they serve together for 2 weeks of the year when their watch is called. So like every 6 months, they're there for a week. They actually only served one day, and then again on Shabbos, because there were enough priests that there were priests available to fill each of the 6 days of their week when their priestly watch is in service, and then they're all there on Shabbos. And then on festivals, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, all of the priestly watches are called into service because so many pilgrims come up to Jerusalem to bring offerings, and all of the priests were needed at those times. So during normal days of the year, not festivals, not Yom Kippur, there's a lottery. There's a few lotteries each morning about what duties the priests who are serving that day will actually take, right? Who's going to bring the daily offering? Who's going to slaughter it? Who's going to clean the menorah? Who's going to clean the altar of the ashes of the previous day's fire, etc.? They have this lottery. But the high priest, there's only one. There's only one high priest at any given time. We've seen that in some situations where a high priest was disqualified at Yom Kippur, and they had to elevate an ordinary priest to be like the substitute high priest that day. So then after the high priest, regains his status, whatever impurity caused him to not be able to serve on Yom Kippur, after he's gone through a purification process, he's again the anointed high priest. And that one who was elevated temporarily sort of doesn't go back to becoming an ordinary priest because he was elevated, even though it's temporary, but he's not the high priest. He's in this kind of limbo state. So there's only really one high priest at any time. If on any given day he wants to do some part of the avoda, bring one of the sacrifices or eat one of the portions that is given to the priest to eat, he may do so, right? He sort of trumps anybody else, any of the ordinary priests. The high priest always has the right to step in and do some part of the daily service. So how does this high priest sacrifice any portion that he chooses first, right? So he's allowed to come in at any day of the year, and the other priests are serving and bringing offerings and sacrifices on behalf of the population or the daily offerings. And if he wants to, he can come in and just say to any priest, you know what, I'll take it from here. He's the boss. In what way does he, exercise that priority? If the high priest so desires, he says, this burnt offering, I am sacrificing. Or this meal offering, I am sacrificing. And that is sufficient. And the high priest does not participate in a lottery. So he's not part of the lottery. Normally they would just let the other ordinary priests, because they don't have so many opportunities like he does, because he's there all year. So he lets the other priests do what they want. But from time to time, maybe because there's somebody, an individual, bringing an offering, and it was a personal friend, or he was asked by a friend of a friend, to bring an offering himself. So he'll just step in, sort of, tap out an ordinary priest, and it's enough for him to say, I want to do it. He does it. And how does the priest take any portion that he chooses first? Meaning certain parts of offerings are eaten by the priest, or the shewbreads are eaten. Now we're talking about portions of the sacrifices that are eaten by priests. So if he wants to eat that thing, he just steps in and, the high priest says, this sin offering, I am eating. Or this guilt offering, I am eating. And he may even take one loaf of the 2 loaves offered on the festival of Shavuos. So that ties to today's Torah reading. The 2 loaves that we bring at Shavuos happen to coincide that's mentioned in the Torah reading today and in today's Talmud page. A little accident that makes us pay special attention. And he may take 4 or 5 of the 12 showbread loaves that are distributed to the priests every Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, the high priest always takes 5 of the 12 showbread loaves, as it is stated, it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a sacred place. That's Leviticus 24:9. From the fact that Aaron and his sons are listed separately, doesn't say that the priests shall take, but it says Aaron and his sons shall take of the bread, right? So the showbreads are these large unleavened cakes of bread that when the temple was standing, they would be baked, and then they would on Shabbos, the old ones would be taken off the showbread table, and the new ones would be placed on it. And one of the miracles of the temple was that these 12 showbreads, after sitting outside for a week, would still be fresh and warm like when they were placed there. And then the priests who are there on that Shabbos, and there's the outgoing priests and the incoming, so there's 2 priestly watches are there on Shabbos, and they are going to divide up the showbreads among the 2 watches. But the high priest himself gets half. We saw that he gets 1 of the 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuos, and he's going to get half of the showbreads. So why does it say 4 or 5 of the 12 loaves? If there are 12 loaves, it would seem like he would get 6. From the fact that Aaron and his sons are listed separately, it is derived that half of the loaves were given to Aaron, or the high priests who succeeded him, and half were given to his sons, meaning the ordinary priests. Since, as explained below, coming up, only 10 of the loaves were actually distributed, the high priest received 5. Now, why were only 10 distributed of the 12? We'll see. Now, this baraisa is itself difficult, as it is self-contradictory. First, you said he takes 1 loaf of the 2 loaves that are offered on the festival of Shavuos. Whose opinion is this? It is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who said that vis-a-vis the ordinary priest, the high priest is so exalted that he takes half, right? There are 2 loaves, half for 1 individual, half for all the other priests that are there on Shavuos, right? Now, that doesn't mean he eats the whole loaf. He has the right to distribute portions of it to other priests, but he has authority over half, right? So he gets 1 loaf, and since it's Shavuos, it's a festival, all the other priests who ever serve in the temple during the year, they're all there. All of them, right? Could be hundreds of them, split the other loaf, at least in terms of their right to split it. So he gets half, they get half. Okay, that makes sense. But now that we said that the high priest, in terms of the showbreads, only gets 4 or 5, why doesn't he get 6, right? That's the question. So first you said he takes 1 loaf of the 2 loaves offered on the festival of Shavuos. Half. Whose opinion is this? It is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who said that the high priest takes half. Say that the middle clause of the baraisa is as follows. The high priest takes 4 or 5 of the 12 showbread loaves. Now that he's getting less than half, we have come to the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And they say that the high priest does not take half. Rather, he takes less than half. And now we come to the last clause of the Baraisa as follows. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that the high priest always takes 5. And the Gemara asks, is this to say that the first clause and the last clause of the Baraisa are in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the middle clause is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis? That conclusion is difficult. Normally, when you have a teaching, it's like it's all according to one opinion, and then it tells you, but somebody else disagrees. But here, we seem to have unattributed opinions where first it's according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, then it's according to the rabbis, and then it's back to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That seems like an unusual construction for a Baraisa. Abaye said, actually, the first clause and the middle clause of the Baraisa are in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And in the case of the 2 loaves, the rabbis who say the high priest, he gets about half, but it has to be less than half because it's inappropriate for one person to take half and all the other priests to take the other half. He should get a little less than half. But there's only 2 loaves at Shavuos, and it is inappropriate and not deferential to the honor of the high priest to give him only a portion of a loaf. So where we only have 2 loaves, okay, you give him 1 loaf and the other loaf is for everybody else. But when you have 12 loaves, again, we're not going to give a portion of a loaf, but now we have an option to give a little less than half. So according to the rabbis, the high priest should actually receive less than 1 loaf, as in their opinion, he is entitled to less than half. However, since it is inappropriate to give him a broken piece of the loaf, he takes an entire loaf as his portion. And what is the meaning of 4 or 5, i.e., when does the high priest take 4 loaves and when does he take 5? So according to the rabbis who say the priestly watch that is incoming on Shabbat, right, the watch of the group of priests who are going to serve in the coming week, they are the incoming watch. Where am I? According to the rabbis who say the priestly watch that is incoming on Shabbat, they take 6 of the loaves, and the outgoing watch takes 6, right? So the priests who have been here for a week, they get 6 of the loaves. The incoming gets 6, and the outgoing gets 6. So then it is from 12 loaves that the high priest must divide and take his share. There are 12 altogether, so he takes 6. The remaining 6 would then be split half and half between the outgoing priestly watch and the incoming priestly watch. But he receives half of the loaves less 1, because the rabbis think he should get less than half. So since he's entitled to 6, but he's going to take less than that, so they give him 5, meaning he takes 5. According to the rabbis, the high priest receives less than half. However, since it is inappropriate to give him a piece of a loaf, a broken loaf, less than half is 5 whole loaves. I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who said, the priestly watch that is incoming on Shabbat takes 7 of the loaves, 2 of which are payment for closing the doors, and the outgoing watch takes 5, then it is only 10 that he must divide the loaves. Meaning there are 12 showbread loaves on that showbread table. Rather than divide them between the outgoing priests and the incoming priests half and half, we actually assign 2 of those loaves to the incoming priests as their payment for closing the doors. I don't really know what that means, but I think it's the idea that, well, they're just starting their shift. And you'd think that the guys who are ending their week of service, they would, they should get rewarded on their way out. But rather, it's that it seems like you're going to fortify the incoming priests who are serving for the week. So you're going to give them the special holy food of the showbreads. And then, once the outgoing priests leave, so then the incoming priests establish themselves in the temple, and they will close the doors at night, right? And the idea, I believe, is that, they are like, they're on shift. They're on duty, right? They're like at the firehouse, as it were. They're going to live in the temple. They're going to serve there. They're going to be there for that week. And they're kind of getting a payment on the way in for that leaving their lives behind and living in the temple for that week. So since the incoming priests get 2, and those are considered like for specific reasons, so they're taken out of the 12. So in fact, there's not 12 being divided between the incoming and outgoing. There's 10 that are really being divided. And so the priest gets half of that. He gets 5, but the rabbis ruled that he should get less than half. So he can't get a partial loaf. So he ends up with 4. So it's according to their opinion that the high priest is entitled to 4 of the loaves. And that is, as Abaye explains, this contradiction in the Baraisa. And that indeed is the halacha. It is according to Abaye in this case. And that's it. That's what I've got today from our daf. So let me come to your questions and comments. Lucy, maybe wisdom and humility are a part of the decision to back up and let the heavy laden pass, right? So from what we discussed about when 2 camels meet on a narrow road and the one that's burdened should be allowed to pass, or 2 ships in a narrow stream, the one that's burdened should be allowed to pass. Absolutely, it is definitely wisdom. It is definitely, and the more humble we are, the wiser we become, or the more we acquire humility, the more we demonstrate that we've acquired some wisdom. But it's something we should really think about, because so often, you see, like I've been teaching my kids how to drive. And when you're teaching driving, you kind of become ultra aware of how you're driving and how other people are driving. And so many people, it's just tunnel vision. All they really think or see is my lane open? Do I have space for me to go forward? And they don't think about, is somebody trying to get into your lane from a difficult situation? They were going in their lane. Somebody stopped in a rude fashion. Now they're stuck. We really need both lanes to do a merger. But if you're just thinking, hey, my lane is open, I'm going to go, then you're not going to, act with grace and wisdom and kind of slow down, take in the situation, realize that the 2 lanes need to merge. And that's when you could slow down, and say to that fella who's stuck over there behind the rudely stopped cart, go right ahead. And whenever you do that and there's a little exchange, the eyes, you see each other, you give a little wave, it's always a nice moment, isn't it? And we should be looking for those situations where somebody else has a burden that we could so easily alleviate just by being cognizant of what's actually going on around us and letting the one with the burden pass. Nina has a question. Did they braid the loaves like we do today? No. So when we're talking about the shewbreads that were on the table, we've seen this elsewhere. First of all, they were unleavened bread, right? So it's much more like soft matzah. But when we discuss the shewbreads, it's like, we've seen soft matzah, which sort of looks a little bit like a large tortilla, right? But the shewbreads were like a tortilla that is this thick. Right? It's unleavened bread, but this thick. Not puffy bread. Fully dense, unleavened bread. And then they would fold over the ends, right? So there wasn't a place it was baked, but unleavened. And it's just like a large kind of square sheet, and then they folded over the ends. And of course, there was a family, I can't remember the name right now, who were entrusted to be the sort of, the bakers of the Holy Temple. And it was a family secret how to make those showbreads perfect, right? And then another question from Nina, did they have to retire at age 50? Yes, the priest could only serve, I think, from the age of 20 to 50. And does that mean that they couldn't give the Kohanic blessing or just couldn't do the temple service? I think it means they just couldn't do the avoda, meaning the temple service. There was a Kohanic blessing given in the temple, but as we know, in Israel they do it every day. That people who are Cohens will bless the congregation. Here outside of Israel, we do it on festivals, on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, on Shavuos, Passover, and Sukkot. Where the Kohanim, the people who are descendants of Aaron, will stand in the front of the room. First, we actually take them outside of the prayer room. We go to where there's a running water and a sink, and people like me, the Levites, will wash the hands of the Kohen. Then they'll go to the front of the room. They will cover themselves with a prayer shawl, and we in the congregation will cover our heads with a prayer shawl. You can't look at a Kohen when he's blessing you. And then they give the blessing, right, over the congregation. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord countenance you and be gracious to you. May the Lord favor you and grant you shalom. So that blessing was given, is given, outside the temple. It continues to be given today. And it's just given by the Kohanim, right? Of any age, they stand in front of the room, and even if a father's a Kohen, his sons are Kohens. And I'm pretty sure you don't have to be bar mitzvah age to do that, because I'm not 100% sure about that, but I've definitely seen pretty young-looking kids going up there with their father, and we hear their voices as they recite the blessing. But in terms of bringing the sacrifices in the temple, there they became disqualified at the age of 50. But we learn elsewhere in Pirkei Avos, you would think like at 50, they're in their prime, right? Like they can't be bringing offerings up to the altar. I'm 55. I feel pretty confident that I could bring an offering up on the altar if I was a Kohen. But it just seems to be like, you've had your time, you move on so that other priests can now serve. And as we see in Pirkei Avot, 50 is called the age of counsel, right? So when you need important counsel in your life, best to get it from a person who's 50 or over. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 18 of Tractate Yoma on Thursday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great evening.